Welcome to the SEI's podcast series, a production of Carnegie Mellon University's Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center funded by the United States Department of Defense and housed on the campus of Carnegie Mellon University. My name is Will Hayes, and I'm a principal engineer here at the Software Engineering Institute. And today I'm pleased to introduce two of my colleagues from Carnegie Mellon. Summer Fowler is a technical director of risk and resilience in the SEI's CERT division. And Ari Lightman is a professor of Carnegie Mellon University's Heinz College of Information Systems and Public Policy. Summer and Ari are here to talk about the evolving role of the Chief Risk Officer and a program that they work on together here at Carnegie Mellon. Welcome, Summer and Ari.
Thanks.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
So before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from before you joined us, and what your specialization is?
Great. Thanks, Will. As you said, my name is Summer Fowler. I've been here at the SEI for a little over 10 years. I started on the software side, and I made a switch over after 2 years into the CERT division, where we focus on cybersecurity. I am a technical director leading a group of about 50 engineers. We're focused in three main areas: enterprise risk management, which really ties in well with the program we're here to talk about today, the insider threat problem, and also, and we're trying to solve that through tools, techniques, and a lot of analysis, and then critical infrastructure protection via some technical and some capability assessments.
Great. Ari, tell us about you.
Sure, Will. So my background is sort of non-traditional academic, for startups, venture capital, management consulting. And I've been at the Heinz College since 2010. I teach a variety of classes at the intersection of marketing and IT. So classes I teach include digital transformation, digital marketing, measuring social analytics. I'm also co-director of our CISO Executive Education Program, which is a joint program between the Heinz College and the Software Engineering Institute. And I'm also a commercialization advisor with our Center for Machine Learning and Health.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So you've really got a strong connection to industry and to what's happening in business, and you're also here with us on Carnegie Mellon's campus. And you've got a fairly broad scope of responsibility, but we're going to narrow the focus of our conversation today. So we'd like to start with a conversation about what a Chief Risk Officer is. Could I ask you to elaborate that?
Sure. So Chief Risk Officer is a relatively new role within an organization. And I think it really got started with the understanding that risk permeates across the entire organization. All departments are dealing with different types of risk, whether it might be cybersecurity risk, technical risk, market risk, those sorts of things. And coming together on a comprehensive enterprise risk strategy was necessary that rolls up into an individual that could actually report to the board.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and Ari's right. What we're really seeing is that corporations are realizing that they have this wide swath of risks. And as Ari noted, they're coming out of these operational units. We're talking about all the things that he listed: reputational risk, the financial risks that organizations are facing, and having someone that is really that point person that's looking across the entire enterprise and saying, in order for us to achieve our strategic goals that the board has set out for us, these are the things that we really need to focus on in terms of how do we manage those? How do we disposition the risks that we face? And the Chief Risk Officer is in that position to do.
So it sounds like without a focal point, we might be sub-optimizing on one topic or another, when in fact actions we take to manage risks in that topic really relate to another topic as well. So this is a kind of a technical challenge that a person in this role would have. What other challenges would a Chief Risk Officer really need to do well at conquering?
Well, I could start us off on saying that communication is critical. Risk is a multi-nuanced, multifaceted, multi-tenant sort of thing across the entire organization. So being able to describe what the risks are without sort of giving everybody sort of the sky is falling scenarios is really critical. So what is the business value that gets imparted to the different organizations associated with understanding holistic risk?
So whereas one player at the table might view this thing in front of them as the worst thing they've ever encountered, but the person sitting next to them has two or three more that on an objective level they're much worse. It's just that this thing for this person is the worst they've ever encountered, and so
absolutely.
they help with that.
So when we might see breach attempts. We see breach attempts occur all the time from an information security perspective. And the CISO, maybe the CIO and the CTO, are very concerned around that specific aspect. But what the risk officer really has to understand is what is the brand impact? What's the reputational impact associated with some of these events occurring, and the need associated with the data that they're collecting, those sorts of things.
And the chief risk officer is really taking what the board and the executive management is laying out as goals for the organization, whether that's market share or it's reaching out and achieving some sort of goal that has been established by that board. The chief risk officer, has to translate that down for the business units to be able to execute towards that goal. Consequently, on the flip side, the chief risk officer is also then looking across the operations, measuring what's happening, monitoring what's going on, and reporting back up to the board or to executive management. These are the risks that we're seeing. Here's the lane that we're in. Here's something that I need you, board, or you, executive management, to make a decision on to make sure that we stay within a risk appetite that we'll be talking about. So that communication is absolutely critical. Someone who is analytical, and able to look across a wide swath of different types of risks and help to make decisions. It's a really a key attribute for a chief risk officer.
So being able to get their arms around the diversity that exists in the product lines and business lines in the business, but also being able to communicate bidirectionally, helping leadership be more effective at communicating to support, helping the people who are doing technical work be effective in communicating to leadership.
Absolutely.
I would also say normalizing across the industry, right? Once you decide on what those variables are that you're looking to measure, different departments measure it differently. If you're looking at a marketing function, they're looking at reputational risk, it's a different scoring mechanism than if it might be cybersecurity risk, those sorts of things.
Okay. So you have a program at the Heinz College that helps people who play this role learn about these things. Could you talk a bit about that program, its inception, and the great things you're doing there?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So we've been looking at executive education for a long time at the Heinz College. We see it as a bridge between some of the things that we're doing in our graduate programs, some of the things that we're doing in our capstone programs where we work with different organizations. And we've been doing it since 2002. One of the first programs that we created was for IT executives, IT professionals, those folks on the path to becoming CIOs. As part of the Klinger-Cohen Competency Act, which came out in '96, that ushered in a variety of different types of exec ed programs for IT professionals in different aspects of the government. When we started the program, we were one of 7 schools that issued it out. It was successful from the get-go, which was great, but then expanded over time to reach different types of circles. So from the branch and the agencies, it went off to the contractors and the consultants who work with the federal government. And then now we're seeing folks from a global audience come in from a variety of different types of companies, both for-profit, non-for-profit, as well as government sector. And we really sort of refined the type of education that we provided. What we saw, which was really interesting, was there were specialized needs, though. So you can't just lump everything in the IT sector. Some things sort of shake out of that. One of the things that shaked out of that was information security. And they needed a specialized program with different types of skills, different curriculum, and a different methodology associated with teaching. That's when we approached our friends at the SEI and developed the CISO Executive Education Program. And that's been going on for about 5 years. It's been a successful model, not just in terms of excellence around cybersecurity education for managers, professionals leading into the CISO role, but also collaboration across CMU. We incredibly value our partnership that we have with the SEI, and it's brought in this really interesting complement of skill sets. Deep, deep knowledge in cybersecurity, as well as policy and data analytics together, makes for a very powerful combination. So we've been running the program for 5 years. I'm happy to say that we are sold out for the next foreseeable future. Every time a breach comes in, we get a good 10, 15 applicants. So that's been wonderful. And out of that, about a year and a half ago, the idea for a chief risk officer came into being. And I'm going to let Summer take it from there.
Great.
Yeah, so some of the hallmarks of Carnegie Mellon University are looking at interdisciplinary activities, really looking and having a lot of rigor and being forward-leaning. So as the role of the chief risk officer has emerged in industry and in the government, Carnegie Mellon really took a step back and said, what can we do to help fill the gap for formal education in this space? There's really not a lot out there in order to help people who are making a transition into this executive role, a C-suite level role. And Carnegie Mellon said, let's help fill that gap and get these people ready for this role. So if you look across the curriculum, it is exactly, part of those hallmarks of being interdisciplinary. Chief risk is looking at all those types of risks that Ari and I discussed, right? So we're not just talking about IT or finance or reputation, we're talking about all of them. Mm-hmm. And so we work across all of the schools here at Carnegie Mellon and with our colleagues in industry to pull in really top-notch instructors, either practitioners who are very deep in their space, or academics who've done a lot of research. And we make this a very practical program. It's about 6 months long, and it's a combination of being in person here on campus in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and distance, but it's synchronous distance. So you're on Tuesday nights, your instructors are on a WebEx, or an Adobe Connect session, and you're learning via that realm. You're also put into a cohort. So if you're a student in the CRO program, and we cap it at no more than 24 students, so it's very intimate, you get to know people very well. You're put into a group of 4 with 3 other students, and that's your team, and you're given an industry or a sector and told to help build a risk program for that sector. Okay. So that's our practicum project. So all of the things that we teach, we also don't want them to just be some sort of academic setting. It's very, very applied.
And these folks, the students, are for the most part people who work in positions of this type or are aspiring
current
to
or aspiring CROs. That's exactly what we're looking for.
So they have a very strong industry flavor to the contributions they make, and I imagine being in one of these cohorts, one of the benefits is what you learn from the other 3 as much as you learn from the people you're bringing in. Yes,
it's a pretty prescriptive way that we look at how we put the teams together. We don't want to have 4 people from government together, and so as the team comes in, as all of the group of students come in, we look across their backgrounds, we see their interests, we look at the sectors, and we on purpose mix them up so that they do have an opportunity to learn from each other.
So you push them outside their comfort zone, get them outside the box.
Again.
So this topic of the risk appetite assessment seems to apply here, that if, let's pretend the 3 of us are a cohort, and we come from different perspectives, the way you would assess the appetite for risk in your organization and the outcome you'd find might be quite different from what I'd find. Could you talk a bit about this notion of risk appetite assessment?
Sure. So, it's an interesting concept to sort of put something out there that everybody can agree on. What are those expectations associated with the amount of risk we're willing to adopt, right, to achieve a strategic objective? And that's where the CRO has to come in, really adhering to this appetite statement, but also understanding that this is not something that's set in stone. This is something that could change on a regular basis. So it has to be fluid and dynamic based on external events that occur, right? If the market shifts and change, their risk appetite needs to shift and change accordingly.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, so this risk appetite statement is something that a chief risk officer would be responsible for developing and having the board approve that risk appetite statement. It's really something like the guardrails for the organization. As you're going down the road, you want to stay within those guardrails so that you're not falling off a cliff or hitting something on the other side. And as Ari said, that changes over time. Markets change, events occur, people leave, there are things outside of your power, political decisions are made, and that can often require a change in either risk appetite or where your tolerance ranges are. But it really does give the entire organization a direction to head towards and to know when adjustments need to be made. So it's setting a baseline for risk comfort for the organization.
Okay, pretty neat. Are there other kind of cornerstone concepts similar to that people would be looking for your program to help them learn more about?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we saw, once again, we've had our first inaugural cohort, and all the teams did phenomenally well. And every time we go through a cohort, we learn something. and we add things to the mix, right? So what does a risk officer need to know associated with budgeting for a full enterprise-wide risk program? So we're adding elements to the mix. As Summer mentioned before, this idea of social engineering is very interesting because it helps sort of change your comfort zone, change your viewpoint associated with how you should assess these things. But we're looking at including much more things, much more in-depth case studies around different companies that are involved in specific global operations, especially if you're operating in EU. I mean, you cannot look at the operation in EU without understanding GDPR, General Data Protection Regulations. And what does that mean associated with changing your risk tolerance, associated with operating within that region?
Okay.
There are two things about the program that I would say really stand out. One is the practicum project that I discussed, where you're put into a team of 4 people. At the end of the program, each team has to present to a board of directors.
Oh.
So this isn't just a matter of I'm listening to the lectures and I'm putting something down in a paper. It's a very real process that they go through in putting together this program that has to be presented to a board. There's a lot of discussion, and we really try to give them a feel for what it will be like in their jobs. Either, maybe they have experienced it and this is something new from a different sector, or maybe I'm aspiring to be a CRO and I'm practicing. So it's a nice environment where they can get some really practical experience.
So they can have a coach pushing them beyond what might have been where they'd be afraid to go in the past, but
Yes.
they're in a safe environment where their career won't be affected by saying the
Yes.
wrong thing. They can really
Right.
try it.
The coach is something important to note, and I'll get back to my second thing. Each team does receive a coach.
Oh, great.
So in addition to the world-class instruction that you get from the teachers who are teaching each of the classes, each team has a coach specific to that team to help them through the process of building the program and building their presentation.
Neat.
So that's great. The other thing I think that's really important about the program is it's forward-looking. So it's not just looking at what the CRO of today needs, but it's also addressing what does the CRO of tomorrow look like. And so helping someone who's in the role currently or someone who's aspiring to be there, how do I set up things like cost-saving targets? The CRO right now traditionally is focused on risk and can be looked at as an expense. What we want them to be is a value add to the company.
Okay.
How do they convey that to the organization? And so we're really helping students who are in these roles figure out, what am I going to be in 5 years? What does this role look like in 5 years for my company?
So being at Carnegie Mellon is a pretty nice thing for that, because there are lots of things that come to us because of the nature of the institution we are. People from around the world who are changing the world are here, and you're able to fold them into the experience the students have in your programs.
Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that we can take advantage of, because we're at Carnegie Mellon, is everything from looking at visualizing complexity to understanding behavioral organization, to looking at some of the latest technologies in terms of how that might impact the risk role within an organization, especially when we look at cognitive computing, business automation, a variety of other things. We're looking at displacement. We're looking at automation of the workforce. That's a really interesting consideration when you try to understand and evaluate risk across the enterprise.
And we can go right into the insider threat insight we have here.
Absolutely.
And the effect of machine learning and other advances in how we process and learn from data. Neat, okay. So there's an evolution, partly because of what you're doing, an evolution in the kind of roles and the kind of focus we have in the C-suite. And the Chief Risk Officer is an illustration of that. And you alluded to this is a position that is facing change and has to keep up with it. What do you see as the near-term, mid-term kind of changes that the Chief Risk Officer is going to face?
I can see that establishing productivity metrics for the organization will be something that a CRO really needs to be able to establish and communicate. I can also see then the translation of how do I communicate all of these diverse sets of risks in a way that makes sense to a board. So the communication element, it really does often come back to that communication element when we talk about the evolution.
Okay.
So within the program, we're trying to elevate the role of the CRO and get people to understand, as Summer mentioned, the business value change the dialogue from mitigating downside risk to what is the business value associated with the program? How does it create more alignment, strategy, effectiveness, agile nature associated with the enterprise going forward? We tend to take a look at sort of what are the industry benchmarks? Who does the CRO report into? Where do they get their budget from? How does the budget get assessed? Those sorts of things. Because, as we're seeing a multi-complex organization, there's a CRO, but there's also a bunch of C blank blank O's as well that are competing for a variety of different types of budgets, resources, and consideration from the board. So we're trying to understand all that and trying to figure out how to elevate that role.
So is it safe to say that the opposite side of risk is not status quo, but really opportunity?
Absolutely.
And so that's the payoff that we want to be able to demonstrate. It's not just eliminating the negative, but finding the leverage for the positive.
Absolutely.
Sound like a slogan.
Yeah, how do you optimize and looking at opportunity as the opposite of risk? How do I then leverage what I know so that I am achieving value add by capitalizing on those opportunities?
But it's also, I think, opportunistic. If you look at today's business environment, right, and all the disruptions that are occurring on a constant basis, before we might have seen black swan events happen rarely. Now we're seeing them happen frequently. Consequently, it just proves that the role of the risk officer is becoming more and more necessary in terms of enterprise strategic planning and understanding how to quickly create resiliency and adaptation, which is critical for any industry operating today.
Okay. So what do you see coming in the future in terms of the evolution of your program for the cohorts that will come in once you've graduated a few more and space is available to sign up? So
as Ari noted, we go through an update. Every time we run a cohort, we go through an update of the curriculum and say, all right, were there hits? Did we miss anything? Were there big hits? What are some things that we need to add? And we're going through that now. We're looking at some of the future of a CRO and pulling in some information and guest speakers that will really hit on things towards the value add. The list of professors that we have are phenomenal. We have from some of the biggest financial institutions acting, CROs who are people who are in the CRO role right now.
Great.
We have an astronaut from campus
who
teaches. I mean, who knows more about risk than an astronaut? Yeah. And so we have a wide swath of a lot of really neat experts. What's really key about the program, though, is the cohort model and the fact that you get to know 23 other people who have common interests. The students really learn to lean on each other. They are building a network, and then you become a part of the CMU community. So now they don't just have the other 23 in class, but they have all the cohorts that graduated before them, the cohorts that are in other programs. And what we've seen is this fantastic network that has grown of professionals in the C-suite. And they've helped each other get jobs.
Wow.
They've celebrated each other's successes. They've written articles about each other in the paper. In fact, this program was written up not long ago in the Wall Street Journal Pro in the cybersecurity area.
Neat.
One of our graduates, Rob Sloan, wrote an article and interviewed several of us about that. So there's a lot of opportunity for exposure and networking and learning from your peers.
Cool. Okay.
So I'd like to see the same progression we've seen in some of our other exec ed programs, where there's a lot of value in risk folks getting together from different organizations, but there's even more value when you bring in folks from the legal side, from the operations, from the technical side, to get them to understand sort of the risk function within an enterprise. So that adds to sort of the social engineering around and the complementary skill sets associated with bringing them in to really create more of a holistic understanding of what does risk mean across an organization. Summer and I also love doing critical thinking, critical reasoning exercises. And I think that's great because to really understand the climate, the business operation climate that you're dealing with, as well as the inside enterprise climate that you're dealing with, you have to ask a variety of questions. And you need to draw that out through this sort of role-playing exercise where you're doing critical thinking, critical reasoning, design thinking, parallel thinking, those sorts of things. So I think there's opportunities to roll that into the program so that we can get them really asking these questions around ethicality, around society, and what's the benefit associated with the societal, the organizational impact around some of these programs. Third, I think there's always an opportunity to do interesting analytics. And maybe it's part and parcel of where I'm from, but I think communicating complex risk matter is really difficult. If you can do that intuitively through digital storytelling around data and allow people to engage with the elements, so if they move something from one area to another area, if I take this pot of money from this risk program to this risk program, what happens to overall risk? Well, now I intuitively know what's happening because I'm actually moving these elements around and integrating, so I'm cognitively processing what would happen. I think that's a wonderful and interesting area to explore in the future.
So that would seem to focus on making things more concrete, more tangible, more accessible, while at the same time, your previous point was to bring a greater diversity of perspectives to help people understand from more than one view the phenomenon that we're trying to manage here.
Absolutely.
Neat.
And if you're on a board, or if you are a CEO and you have a chief risk officer, or you are looking to get a chief risk officer, it's the kind of program that you really want to send your people to, because we're teaching them the critical thinking and the deep skills, but we're also constantly reminding them, you're doing this for the goals of the business. So we're helping them keep their eye on the ball of, there are business objectives that we're trying to achieve. It's not that you're doing this, in a vacuum. So it's all of these skills pulled together to achieve the end game.
So it's not something you learn by rote and then repeat, rinse and repeat
No.
over and over again. It's something you really need to understand where you are, what the context is, and apply as appropriate.
And if you have a CRO of one company and you move to another company, it's going to be different in how the execution occurs. We're teaching the fundamentals that can translate to any of those platforms.
Okay. Great. I'd like to thank you both for coming in. It's been very interesting today.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about the program we've been discussing, you can look for information on the Chief Risk Officer Certificate Program on the Heinz College website at www.heinz.cmu.edu/programs. Also, an internet search for Chief Risk Officer will likely turn up that program as well. I'm told that it's often the first result when you do a search. Please know also that we will provide links and references for information we've discussed here today, and a transcript of this podcast is available for download on our website. And as always, you can go to sei.cmu.edu/podcasts for a full listing of this and other podcasts available, as well as on Carnegie Mellon University's iTunes U site, and finally on SEI's YouTube channel. And as always, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to send us an email at info@sei.cmu.edu.